Well, happy Easter. So, we all know from all the years of being on this planet that Easter's all about resurrection. It's about rising above any challenge we have in our lives. So the point of rising up is to radiate fully the divine presence that's within us. But once I heard a speaker on Palm Sunday who said, in order to have our Easter, we have to have our Holy Week. She talked about the metaphysical significance of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on the donkey, and how the donkey stood for stubbornness as well as humility. She called us all to become aware of the places in our lives where we ride the donkey of stubbornness. When we're too attached to a certain belief, outcome, or mindset. The Walk of Holy Week reminds us that every one of us are called to rise above those mindsets and to become as the Christ. We have dominion over all things. I don't know that we take that into our hearts, but we're going to talk about that today. In the Christian belief, the celebration of the resurrection of Jesus from death is a symbol for us on so many levels. It's of our indomitable spirit, of the continuity of life, the possibility of renewal from all those situations in life that seem as though they threaten us. Jesus taught us this through his example, that we all embody that same Christ's presence and strength that he did. We're not victims of anything, not even death, and that we're able to stand up and face every challenge, knowing that we are created for victory. He taught us this through his example, but also he taught us that we, too, were as he is. Take a breath. The story of Jesus' life is just one of the ancient stories that depict the hero's journey. Included in Joseph Campbell's 12 steps of the hero's journey is the 11th step, which he calls resurrection, and defines it this way. This is the climax in which the hero must have his final and most dangerous encounter with death. The final battle also represents something far greater than the hero's own existence, and its outcome has far-reaching effects and consequences to his ordinary world, as well as to the lives of those he left behind. Jesus did not come to found a religion. He came to give us a blueprint for living as a divine human. This is our hero's journey. In her book, Rising Strong, Brené Brown says this: "You may not have signed up for a hero's journey, but the second you fell down, got your butt kicked, suffered disappointment, screwed up, or felt your heart break, it started." It doesn't matter whether we're ready for an emotional adventure or not. It happens. And when it happens to every single one of us without exception. The only decision we get to make is what role it will play in our lives. Do we want to write the story, or do we want to hand that power over to someone or something else? Choosing to write our own story means getting uncomfortable. It's choosing courage over comfort. In the biblical telling of Jesus' journey, we remember his time in the Garden of Gethsemane. He recognized that his mortal mind was afraid of the suffering that he knew was coming. He did not deny those feelings. He didn't pretend they weren't there. He acknowledged them and then chose to take the next step in fulfilling his spiritual purpose. We too reach these times of fear and concern, anxiety. We also need to go apart as Jesus did and discern, what will we choose? When we choose to move forward in truth with a capital T, we find the paralysis dissolves and confidence moves in. Sometimes we may be distracted. We might be tempted to discount or disown our own fears in order to put on the face of someone who's happy and more acceptable. However, our wholeness actually depends on the integration of all our experiences, even the pain, the anxiety, and the worry. Our goal on our hero's journey is to rise up against the times when we fall, the times when we're knocked down, the mistakes that we feel we've made, to face hurt in a way that brings more wisdom and wholeheartedness to our lives. Ultimately, we write our own ending based on what we have learned and what we have chosen. We transform our lives. The courage we display, the love that we tap into and then radiate out, the energy of victory not only serves us, but it serves those around us. It can be a guiding light for someone else. Jesus gave us parables in his teachings to illustrate these truths. The parable of the prodigal son, who takes his inheritance, goes out and squanders it, leaving himself in ruin, then returns to his father, confesses his errors, and ends up with the full, unconditional love of his father. When the son returns, the father embraces him and says, "We're going to have a feast, because this son of mine was lost and now is found. He was dead and now has come back to life." There are also modern parables, parables of resurrection. I happened to find one this week in my reading in Anne Lamott's book entitled Stitches, a handbook of meaning, hope, and repair. I read this story and just felt so connected with it. I hope that it does the same for you. In 1995, in a beautiful coastal town of 1,500 people, there was a devastating fire on a ridge that bordered the town. 4 older teen boys had camped overnight illegally, built a campfire, buried it under the dirt when they left in the morning. They had unknowingly caused a fire that destroyed over 1,200 acres of land and beautiful wilderness, as well as 50 homes. A columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle published an article a few weeks after the fire describing the heroism of the firefighters, the community's untiring efforts to save whatever they could, and the generosity and compassion that bloomed as the community came together to recover from this tragedy. Crucifixion had occurred. Resurrection was at hand. The 4 boys who had accidentally started the fire turned themselves in early on with their parents by their side. A firefighter wrote a letter to the local paper describing how carefully the boys had tried to put out the fire. Though they had extinguished the flames, the embers were burning underground, and they did not realize that, and that was the danger that still existed. After that article, As the townspeople continued to work through their loss and pain, they also told stories of their worst mistakes as teenagers. This community came together, and they held a picnic of celebration. Speeches were given, tears were shed, and gratitude expressed for the blessings they had shared. The president of the firefighters gave a speech, but at the end, he digressed and he shared this. He talked about how in ancient times, people who did damage to a town were sent to live outside its walls. They were banished, deprived of the protection of the community. He had heard that the families of the 4 boys were thinking about moving away. And he thought the town should make it clear to the families that they should stay, that they were wanted, that they were needed in this community. Overwhelming applause followed. The families whose houses had been destroyed came forward, and they expressed their agreement with the plan. The author of the article in the Chronicle wrote this: "So what seems to be happening is that this community, which has just fought so stubbornly to save itself from a Holocaust, has turned almost without missing a beat to try and save the future of 4 young men." How many times do we banish ourselves? The hope of resurrection. When in this life of ours, there's still those failings. There's still those mysterious twistings and turnings that lead us from life through the times of darkness. The chance for victory exists and can bring us forward with more gifts than we can imagine. The message of today, this story of overcoming and knowing our indomitable spirit, is a call to all of us. We try to avoid the call by saying and believing that Jesus was different. He was different. He was the exception. But God calls all of us. Jesus didn't set himself apart from us. He said, "These things and even greater things shall you do." When we hear this, we're likely to have 2 responses. Wow, me? Or maybe another part of us more frequently says, no, not me. But the truth is that each of us is called to speak to the higher truth and express our highest being in every situation and to bring our light. I know that in this very room that there are examples of people who have overcome adversities and atrocities of every kind. Each of us has overcome death in some way or another. The death of a relationship, of a betrayal, the death of disease, the death of financial challenge. Yet we go on. In my spiritual community in Ohio, we gratefully encircled one Easter morning Dorothy Bircher, a very respected and longtime member of our community. She had just spent many weeks in hospice. She actually went 8 days without eating. And then she woke up and said, "I want a tuna fish sandwich." She was 92. I've known Dorothy for many, many years. In her 80s, or mid-80s, she babysat my daughter's children while my daughter worked. So after this resurrection, I began to read about her life. After her 90th birthday, she wrote and published a book called "What Will I Do with the Rest of My Life?" That sums up Dorothy in a minute. She had in her lifetime given birth to 13 children, which in my book makes her a hero right there. But that is not even scraping the surface of this woman's hero's journey. Some of the highlights include that shortly after giving birth to her 8th child, she enrolled in school and became a teacher. She continued her education until she received her master's degree. While continuing to teach, she gave birth to 5 more children, sometimes only taking a week or 2 off after each birth. She did all of this with some help, of course, but truthfully, her marriage was more of a compromise than an asset. Story after story tells of continuing to choose to devote herself to her children and her work, all while maintaining a household. This last time she was hospitalized, before the hospice adventure, I talked to her daughter, Mary Jane, and she said that after less than 1 day in the hospital, her mother, she was having breathing difficulties. Her mother was bored. And she said, "Mary Jane, bring me the quilt that I'm working on." There was a grandchild or a great-grandchild coming. She wanted to get that quilt done. We kind of thought that might be her last act. But now she's living out another resurrection story. And who knows where she goes from here. Already she's helped and inspired so many with her dedication and her persistence. Dorothy continues to rise up and gives us all a new benchmark for living. She embodies the Christ energy fully in her story, in her rising. And I'm happy to report that yesterday she celebrated her 95th birthday with the community around her. Spiritual teacher Ram Dass once said, "Everything in our lives is a vehicle for transformation. Use it." In his own life, he demonstrated this in his powerful recovery from a near-fatal stroke, which left him paralyzed on the right side of his body and with expressive aphasia limiting his ability to speak, along with other challenging ailments. He writes about it in his book, Still Here, Embracing Aging, Changing, and Dying. Once again, we meet here with someone who is living the message of resurrection, expressing the essence of the meaning of this spiritual event in the words of Reverend Dr. Jesse Tanner. He writes, "Traditionally, Easter is the celebration of the resurrection of Jesus. Yet its inner spiritual significance is the experience of a new consciousness, infused with God's love and wisdom. Easter happens when we attune to the Christ within. Easter happens when we give and receive loving kindness. Easter happens when we release old patterns of belief or practice that no longer serve us, opening to fresh avenues of transformation." Charles Fillmore says, "Every time we rise to the realization of eternal indwelling life, the resurrection takes place within us. We each possess the indomitable Christ Spirit. We each hold the power of resurrection, no matter what difficulty crosses our path. Today's message, this Easter message, is a message of hope and strength and of victory. It's available to each of us. I encourage you, no matter what you are facing, to rise up and do it again and again, knowing that the indwelling life within you meets every challenge." Before I moved here to Colorado, I was attending a beautiful spiritual practice of Nidra Yoga. It's a 90-minute experience into relaxing, into the effortless presence of Spirit. Each class, our leader would end with a statement which I wish to share with you today. Normally I close my message with Namaste, which briefly means I salute the divine in you. Today I offer you this, Jai Bhagwan. It's the Hindu interpretation of Namaste and translates roughly as victory to the divine within. Jai Bhagwan, my dear friends, may you rise up in all your ways.